A sudden crack of a branch shattered the calm, sending chills down the spine. The faint sound of heavy breathing grew closer, unseen but undeniably near. Then, without warning, a massive shadow charged from the trees. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we dive into today's stories, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe to stay updated with future stories. Also, leave a comment letting me know which city in the world you're watching from. It was one of those evenings when the fading sunlight painted everything in soft hues, the kind of twilight that made you think the world had stopped moving just long enough for you to catch your breath. I stood on the porch of our home, sipping a cold beer, listening to the wind rustling through the pines at the edge of the property. The faint smell of fresh-cut grass still lingered in the air from earlier in the day. Cody, our golden retriever, was rolling around in the yard, chasing a tennis ball I'd thrown for him earlier. Montana's wilderness is always there, like a hum in the background. Even in town, the forest isn't far off. Just past the tree line, the land stretches out into the vastness of the Rockies. Bears are a part of that world. I've always been aware of the risks, but I've lived here for years, and aside from the occasional bear sighting, I've never felt anything to fear. That evening, though, something felt off. The wind had died down. The air was still. I was just about to head inside when I heard it. No at first, but unmistakable. A growl. I froze, my beer halfway to my lips. Cody stopped mid-roll, his ears pricking up. The growl wasn't coming from him, or anything else that I could easily dismiss. It was deep, guttural, primal. The kind of sound you'd hear from an animal with far more teeth than your average house pet. Cody was still, his body tense. His tail wagged nervously, a sign that something wasn't right. "Cody," I called, my voice a little tighter than usual. "Come here, buddy." He didn't move. Instead, he started barking. But there was something frantic in the way he did it. A desperation in his voice that sent a chill down my spine. I pushed open the porch door and stepped down onto the grass, scanning the yard. And first, I saw nothing but the darkening woods beyond the fence. Then, just at the edge of the tree line, I caught a glimpse of movement. Something big, a shadow, darker than the growing night, moved between the trees. Too big to be a deer, too low to be a moose. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as my instincts screamed "Underscar." I called to Cody again. "Cody, come on, inside." But he was too focused, his attention locked on the shadow. His barking turned into frantic yelps, and I saw him start to move toward the tree line, his fur bristling. "No, no, no, stay here," I shouted, my feet moving without thinking, my heart pounding. My eyes never left the spot where I'd seen the shadow. It was too late. The bear emerged from the trees, huge and black as midnight, its massive head swiveling to fix its gaze on Cody. My dog's barking turned into a yelp of terror, and before I could even process what was happening, the bear lunged. "Cody!" I screamed, instinct kicking in. My legs were already moving, running toward them. The bear's claws sank into the fur on Cody's back, and I heard a sickening crunch as the beast's jaws snapped around his neck. It all happened so fast, faster than I could register. The growl of the bear was deafening as it tore into my dog. "No!" I shouted again, but I couldn't move fast enough. The space between me and the bear seemed to stretch out endlessly, my legs like lead, my body moving too slowly as I watched my dog struggle beneath the beast's weight. I wasn't thinking, I wasn't reasoning, I just acted. I grabbed the first thing I could, a metal rake lying on the porch, and ran toward them. "Get off him," I yelled, raising the rake above my head and charging at the bear. The rake struck the bear's side with a dull thud, barely making an impact on its thick fur. The bear's head whipped toward me, its eyes cold and predatory, the wild fury of an animal doing what it was born to do. The bear didn't flinch. I swung again, desperate, this time catching it in the face. It didn't seem to care. The rake bent beneath the weight of its skull, and with one terrifying swipe, The bear swatted me aside like I was nothing more than an annoyance. I crashed to the ground. The wind knocked out of me. My arm hit the dirt first, and for a moment, all I could do was lie there, gasping for breath. Everything hurt. My vision blurred for a second, but I fought to clear it. Cody wasn't making any noise. The bear wasn't finished. With a low growl, it turned back to Cody, whose body was limp beneath the bear's claws. I scrambled to my feet, adrenaline coursing through my veins, but the world seemed to spin. My vision swam with spots as I pushed myself toward them again. "Cody!" I screamed, but my voice was shaky, weak. Then something in my arm exploded in pain. The bear had lunged at me, its teeth sinking into my left forearm. A primal scream tore from my throat as its grip tightened, the pain blinding, everything fading except the pressure and heat of the bear's bite. I kicked at the bear's chest, feeling the sharp claws scrape against my skin. With a sudden jerk, the bear released me and stepped back, its dark eyes never leaving me. The growl it emitted was a warning, a declaration of power. I staggered back, clutching my arm as blood oozed between my fingers. Cody was still on the ground, and though I wanted to reach for him, I couldn't. My entire body felt like it was on fire. The bear, after a moment of silent calculation, began to retreat into the woods, its heavy paws thudding softly against the dirt as it faded back into the shadows. It didn't look back, couldn't breathe. My chest heaved, struggling to draw in air as I sank to my knees beside Cody. "Please, Cody." My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but Cody was breathing, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. He was alive, thank God, but injured. Blood stained his golden fur, and he whined weakly as he tried to lift his head. I reached for him, my arm burning with every movement. "It's okay, buddy. You're gonna be okay." But deep down, I knew I wasn't sure. The bear was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something bigger, and it was still out there. I dragged myself to my feet, my legs unsteady. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, and the pain in my arm was unbearable. My thoughts were jumbled, but I knew one thing for certain. I had to get help. I stumbled back toward the house, my vision darkening at the edges. My heart pounded in my chest, a loud reminder of how close we'd come to death. The house felt a million miles away. As I reached the door, I slammed my hand against the frame, feeling the rough would dig into my palm. "Cody, hang on," I muttered, half to myself, half to my dog. "I'm gonna get help." But the only thing I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the sound of the wind stirring again. The quiet had returned, but it wasn't the same. The yard was eerily silent now, the kind of silence that feels like the calm before a storm. I knelt beside Cody, my breath coming in ragged gasps, every inch of my body pulsing with pain from the bear's bite. My left arm was a mess, the skin torn wide open, blood dripping from my fingers as I clutched it to my side. I could feel the warmth of it, thick and sticky, seeping through my clothes. Cody whimpered at my side, his golden fur matted with blood, his body trembling beneath my touch. His usual playful demeanor was gone, replaced by a quiet, fearful confusion. I couldn't tell if he was too dazed to move or too scared to get up, but I didn't have time to analyze it. My heart was hammering in my chest, and the adrenaline that had carried me through the initial shock was beginning to wear off, leaving behind an ache that seemed to burrow deep into my bones. I wasn't sure what to do first. Call for help? Get inside? At that moment, it felt like nothing was enough. The bear had disappeared into the woods, but I knew it wasn't gone. Not for good. I had to get help. I had to make sure it didn't come back for Cody or for me. But just as I turned toward the house, I heard something, low, rumbling, a growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. My blood ran cold. "No, deal, no, blow." I muttered under my breath, my eyes frantically scanning the yard. The bear. It was back. I turned to Cody, who was still struggling to stand, his legs buckling beneath him. "Cody," Stay down, I whispered urgently, trying to push him further toward the porch. Stay down, buddy, stay safe. But it was too late. The bear was already stepping out of the tree line, its massive head emerging from the shadows. The growl it emitted this time was more guttural, deeper, almost like a warning. I couldn't see its eyes yet, but I didn't need to. I knew what was coming. I didn't even think. I just acted. I grabbed the rake again, my grip slipping from the sweat that had formed on my palms, and charged toward the bear. My legs were heavy, my arm on fire, but my mind was clear. There was no time for hesitation. Cody was still too weak to run, and I wasn't about to let that bear have him again. Get away from him, I shouted, my voice raw and desperate. The bear turned its head slowly toward me, its eyes narrowing as it saw the threat I posed. Small and insignificant as I was, it snarled, a sound that made my blood freeze. I swung the rake with all my strength, aiming for the bear's face, trying to drive it back. It wasn't even a contest. The rake barely grazed its fur before the bear swatted it away with a single swipe, sending the handle flying through the air. I staggered back, my feet caught on the uneven ground, but I didn't fall. I couldn't afford to fall. It advanced, slowly, deliberately, like it was savoring the fear it was drawing out of me. The bear didn't seem to have the same sense of urgency it had before. It was no longer focused on Cody. Now I was the one in its sights. I took a few more steps back, trying to put distance between myself and the bear, but it was getting closer with every second. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in on me from all sides. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, pounding in rhythm with the thud of the bear's massive feet as it drew nearer. _focus, Tom. Stay calm. You've got to think. You can't fight it. _ I glanced around wildly, looking for anything that could help. The porch, the house. There was nothing within reach except the jagged rake handle on the ground. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't outfight it. The only thing left was to hope it would leave once it got what it wanted, once it realized I wasn't a threat. But as I looked down at Cody, still struggling weakly on the ground, my resolve hardened. You're not taking him? I muttered, my voice barely audible over the rush of adrenaline. I gritted my teeth, my arm aching, and took another step forward. The bear stopped. For a moment, we locked eyes, me. A broken man was no weapon, and the bear, a wild creature of muscle and teeth, its mouth dripping with saliva. The growl that came next wasn't the low rumble I'd heard before. It was a warning, the challenge. I swung the rake handle again, desperation and panic lending strength to my movements. This time, I caught the bear across its thick fur, but it didn't even flinch. It barely even acknowledged it. Then, in one swift, terrifying motion, the bear lunged at me. It happened so fast I didn't have time to process it. The bear was on me before I could react, its weight crashing into me with the force of a freight train. I tried to scream, but the air was knocked out of me as we hit the ground, the breath stolen from my lungs. The bear's teeth found my arm again, the same spot where it had bitten me earlier. This time, the pain was so sharp it was like fire coursing through my veins. I screamed, but the sound was strangled in my throat. I felt its hot breath on my face, felt its massive body pressing down on me, pinning me to the ground as it shook its head in my direction. This is it. I thought, my thoughts frantically swirling. This is how I die. But then the bear stopped. I don't know why. Maybe it sensed that I was no longer a threat, or maybe it had gotten what it came for. Either way, the pressure on my chest eased, and the bear stepped back, releasing my arm from its mouth. The pain was unbearable, but I wasn't sure if it was the bite itself or the shock that made me feel like I might pass out. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or not. But then I heard the growl again, louder, more satisfied. And just like that, the bear turned and started walking away, its massive frame retreating into the shadows of the woods. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move, too stunned to process what had just happened. The adrenaline was fading now, and with it, the sense of urgency. I felt like I was sinking into the ground, the weight of everything, the fear, the pain, the helplessness crushing me. Finally, I managed to drag myself to my feet, my body shaking violently. I looked down at Cody. He was still breathing, his golden fur stained red, but he wasn't dead. He was alive. I stumbled toward him, falling to my knees beside him, my blood mixing with his. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, though my voice barely made it past my lips. "We're okay." But the truth was we weren't. The bear had come, taken what it wanted, and left. But it was still out there, somewhere watching, waiting. I knew that now. The wild was no longer just a backdrop to my life. It had come to claim a piece of it, and I wasn't sure it would stop with me. Underscore, I have to get help. Underscore, I thought. But as I looked around the darkening yard, the thought of facing that bear again made my stomach twist. I helped Cody to his feet, my body screaming in protest, and together we stumbled toward the house. The house felt miles away, but somehow I managed to stagger inside, dragging Cody with me, his weight pulling against me as I stumbled through the door. The air was thick with the stench of blood and fear, and all I could hear was the ragged sound of my breathing, every inhale burning in my lungs. I dropped to my knees in the entryway, my hand clutching the doorknob as if it were the only thing keeping me from collapsing. The house had always felt like a sanctuary, a place where the wildness of Montana was kept at bay, but now it felt like a trap. The walls, once comforting, now felt cold and oppressive, as though they were closing in on me. My head was spinning, and I couldn't tell if it was from the blood loss or the sheer terror of what had just happened. Cody whined weakly beside me, and I forced myself to focus on him. I couldn't let myself fall apart. "Not now. Cody, hang in there, buddy," I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady. I reached out and gently ran my hand through his fur, but it was matted with blood, and his body trembled beneath my touch. He looked up at me with those big, sad eyes, and I could see the fear in them. Underscore, he knew what had happened. He knew the bear was real. Underscore, I glanced down at my arm. The wound was deep. 2 large gashes where the bear's teeth had sunk into my flesh. The blood wasn't flowing as freely now, but it had soaked through my shirt and dripped down to the floor. My hand was sticky with it, but I could hardly feel anything except the burn of the bite and the overwhelming sense of helplessness that had settled over me. Underscore, get yourself together, Tom. Underscore, I thought, trying to push past the wave of panic that was threatening to consume me. Underscore, you need to do something. Underscore, I reached for my phone, which was still in my pocket, and tried to dial 911. But as soon as I pressed the first digit, the call failed. I cursed under my breath and tried again. And again. Nothing. The reception was spotty out here, but I never thought it would fail me when I needed it most. I looked out the window, the darkening sky pressing against the glass like an ominous reminder of the wild world outside. There was no way I could make it to the nearest hospital, not with Cody in the condition he was in, and not with my own arms throbbing with pain. Underscore, I need help. Underscore, I thought. Underscore, I need to get someone here. But who? Underscore. I glanced over at Cody again, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He was still alive, but I didn't know for how long. I could feel the weight of it, the knowledge that if I didn't act fast, both of us could be dead by morning. I grabbed my jacket, throwing it over my shoulders, and reached for the phone again. I couldn't rely on 911, but maybe I could get someone in town to help. I dialed the sheriff's office, my fingers shaking as I pressed the numbers. It rang once, twice. "Sheriff's office, this is Deputy Walker. How can I help you?" Came the voice on the other end. It was calm, almost too calm. "Deputy, you have to listen to me," I said, my voice tight. "There's a bear and attack. It came into my backyard, attacked my dog, and, God, it bit me too." There was a pause on the other end, A moment of silence that made my blood run colder than it already was. "Sir, are you sure it was a bear?" the deputy asked, his tone flat. "It's not uncommon for people to mistake other animals for bears around here." I clenched my jaw, biting back the urge to scream. "Deputy, I know what I saw. I've lived here long enough to know the difference. It was a damn bear, and it's still out there." Another long pause, this time longer than the last. I could hear the rustling of papers on the other end, the deputy shifting in his seat. "Well, sir, if it was indeed a bear, we can have a ranger come by and take a look in the morning," he said, as though discussing a leaky faucet, not a mauling. "We've had reports of bear sightings around your area recently. They've been getting closer to homes, but it's usually just curiosity. They don't tend to get aggressive unless it feels threatened." "I know," I snapped. "But this bear wasn't just curious. It attacked my dog and then went after me. I'm bleeding out here and my dog's bleeding too. You've got to do something now. Not tomorrow." There was a long sigh from the other end of the line. "I understand you're upset, but you're going to have to wait until daylight. We'll send someone out to investigate, but there's nothing we can do right now. Bears don't usually attack humans unless they're cornered or provoked." "Provoked?" I nearly shouted. "You think I provoked it by running out to save my dog? I was just trying to protect him, and the bear came after me like it was hunting. You don't get it. This wasn't just a bear wandering through. This was an attack, sir." The deputy's voice had turned more professional, more distant. "We'll have someone look into it tomorrow. Just stay inside, lock up, and don't go back out there. You're lucky you're not worse off." The line went dead before I could say anything else. I lowered the phone, staring at it in disbelief. My throat was tight with frustration, anger, and helplessness. The deputies, the rangers, they didn't understand. They didn't feel what I felt. They hadn't seen what I saw. I glanced over at Cody again. His eyes were half closed now, his breathing slow but steady. I felt a flicker of hope in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, he was going to be okay. But I knew that hope was thin. As much as I tried to ignore it, I couldn't. The bear was still out there. The woods were still its domain. And if it came back, there wouldn't be anyone to stop it. I looked down at my arm. The blood had started to congeal, but I could still feel the throbbing, the deep ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. There was no way I was going to wait until morning. If that bear was out there, if it was coming back, I wasn't going to sit idly by while my dog bled out or worse. I stood up shakily, my body screaming at me to stop, to rest, to get help. But I couldn't wait. I couldn't do nothing. The sheriff's office wasn't going to help me. They weren't going to understand. But maybe, just maybe, I could find someone who would. With it, grunt, I pulled myself together, my mind made up. I wasn't going to let this go. Not without a fight. I grabbed my jacket and my keys, throwing them into my pocket as I glanced down at Cody. "Stay here, buddy. I'll be right back," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to reassure more, him or myself. I had no idea what I was about to face. I didn't even know if I'd make it back in one piece. But as I opened the door and stepped back out into the night, the cold air biting at my skin, I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let that bear take any more from me. Not without a fight. The night air was sharp as I stepped outside, the cold biting through my jacket like it had an agenda of its own. I stood for a moment on the porch, staring into the darkness beyond the yard, feeling a creeping sense of dread settle in my chest. The lights of the house were warm and comforting behind me, but the second I turned my back to them, I was exposed, completely vulnerable to whatever might be lurking out there. I shouldn't have been going out. My head was still spinning from the bear attack. The blood from my arm had soaked through my shirt, and the pain was a constant reminder of how close I'd come to death. But my instincts were louder than my sense of self-preservation. Cody was still inside, but he wouldn't last long without medical attention. And if I stayed home, I wouldn't be able to get it for him. I walked quickly down the front steps and across the yard, every crunch of the frost beneath my boots making my heart race. The night was too still. No wind, no rustling of leaves. Just the weight of the world pressing in. I moved toward the road, my breath coming in short bursts, my hand instinctively checking my phone in my pocket for a signal. Nothing. Not that I expected it to change, but the habit of trying to connect with the outside world was hard to break. It didn't matter anyway. I'd already tried every number I could think of, sheriff, local rangers, even the emergency services out of town. No one would help until morning, they said. Wait until morning. As if I had the luxury of time. I quickened my pace, heading toward the edge of the property where the road curved into the trees. The pavement wasn't far now, but the thought of what I might find out there made me hesitate. A bear, that monster that had attacked Cody and me, could be anywhere, circling, waiting, watching. Stay calm. I told myself, willing the irrational fear to recede. I had a job to do. I couldn't lose my mind now. The rustle of leaves broke the silence. My body went rigid. My pulse spiked. I turned sharply toward the sound, my heart hammering in my chest. At first, I couldn't see anything, but then a shadow moved between the trees at the edge of the yard. A large shadow. I froze. The fear hit me like a punch in the stomach. Guillaume Basfano. No. Lo. Nuandelini. My body reacted before my brain did. I backed away quickly, my eyes never leaving the trees, my hand instinctively reaching for the cell phone in my pocket again. The screen flickered to life. One bar, a small, fragile thread of hope. I cursed under my breath as I dialed the sheriff's office again, this time praying for someone to pick up. It rang and rang. Please pick up, I muttered under my breath, my throat dry, desperate. Finally, the voice of Deputy Walker came through, calm and indifferent. Sheriff's office. Deputy, I said, my voice louder than I intended, cracking with fear. I told you earlier, the bear, it's back. It's here. Sir, we spoke earlier, he replied, his tone unchanged. We'll send someone in the morning. You need to stay inside and wait until then. I'm telling you, it's right here, I snapped, my pulse racing in my ears. The phone cut out with a shrill beep. I swore under my breath, slamming the phone shut in frustration. My grip tightened on it until my knuckles turned white. The shadow moved again, and my heart froze. This time I could make out the shape clearly. It was big, too big, to bear. I knew it. I turned to run, panic seizing my body as I sprinted toward the house. My feet scrambled on the frozen ground, my arms screaming in protest, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't outrun it. I couldn't even see if it was following me. But I didn't need to. The terror was enough. Just as I reached the front steps of the porch, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy paws behind me. It was close, too close. I whipped around, the instinct to defend myself kicking in once more. I grabbed the nearest object I could see, one of the large flower pots near the porch. I swung it at the bear, desperate to keep it away from me, from Cody inside, but the pot was too unwieldy. It didn't do a damn thing except shatter on the ground with a sickening crunch. The bear lunged. I barely had time to react. Its massive weight hit me with the force of a wrecking ball, sending me flying backward into the cold earth. My back slammed into the frozen grass with a jolt that knocked the wind out of me. I gasped for breath as I looked up at the bear, towering over me, its teeth bared in a snarl. It was huge. Its fur was thick and matted, its claws gleaming like daggers in the moonlight. It stood over me, not rushing in for the kill, but watching, almost like it was sizing me up. I was frozen, paralyzed with fear, unable to move. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. The bear took a slow step toward me, its eyes locking on mine. I could feel the weight of its gaze, the primal intensity of its presence. It sniffed the air, then growled low, a guttural sound that vibrated in my chest. It wasn't done with me yet. The door to the house burst open behind me. "Tom?" a voice shouted. and I turned to see my wife, Emily, standing there, her eyes wide with terror as she caught sight of the bear. "Get inside," I screamed, pushing myself up with what little strength I had left. The bear's attention shifted to her for just a split second, and that's when I made my move. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain in my arm, the pain in my legs, and grabbed the nearest thing. Another rake, discarded on the porch from earlier. "Get in the house," I shouted to her, brandishing the rake between me and the bear. Emily didn't hesitate, retreating back inside and slamming the door shut behind her. But the bear didn't care about her. Its focus was still on me, its eyes glinting with something more animalistic, more hungry. It wasn't interested in the house. It was after me. I had seconds. I lunged forward, thrusting the rake with everything I had, aiming for the bear's face. It swatted it aside with one swipe, knocking me back onto the ground again. I didn't have a chance to catch my breath before the bear was on me again, its claws scraping the air just inches from my face. I rolled away, just barely avoiding the next swipe, my body screaming as it hit the ground. The bear stepped forward again, its massive paw lifting, ready to crush me. Then, just as suddenly as it had attacked, it stopped. The bear growled once more, loud and deep, before stepping back, its body going still. The moment stretched on, long enough for me to wonder if it had decided I wasn't worth the effort. But then it turned, its heavy form retreating into the trees, disappearing into the dark woods with a final low grunt. I lay there, canting, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stared at the spot where the bear had been just moments before. The adrenaline was fading, but the panic was still there, like a shadow waiting to overwhelm me. Couldn't believe it. The bear had just left, but I didn't have time to think about it. I pushed myself to my feet, stumbling toward the door, my legs shaking beneath me. I had to get inside. I had to make sure Emily and Cody were safe. But as I stepped inside, I realized something that made my stomach turn. The bear had come close enough to kill me, and next time, it might not leave. And now, with Emily inside and Cody still in the house, I realized that we were all waiting, just waiting, for it to come back. The door slammed shut behind me with a finality that made my pulse race. I leaned against it for a moment, panting, the smell of blood and sweat heavy in the air, and the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. The bear was gone, for now, but my body ached, and my mind was a frantic blur of confusion and fear. I could still hear the growls echoing in my ears, still feel the bear's hot breath on my face, its claws just inches from my skin. But Emily was safe at least, and Cody too. I had gotten them both inside. The bear hadn't followed us into the house. Still, the thought that the creature could return at any moment made my stomach churn. Couldn't relax, not until I knew the danger was gone. But I knew deep down that the danger wasn't gone. Not for good. The bear would come back. I turned to face Emily, who was standing in the kitchen, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with fear. She was shaking, but whether it was from the cold or the terror of what had happened, I couldn't tell. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the adrenaline and panic. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at me. Really looked at me, her eyes scanning my torn shirt, the blood soaking through, my arm still clutching at my side where the bear had bitten me. The cuts were deep, and even though the bleeding had slowed, the pain was a constant, dull throb in my muscles. "Jesus, Tom," she said, her voice cracking. She rushed to my side, grabbing my arm with a gentle urgency. "What the hell happened out there? You were supposed to just stay inside." "I know," I interrupted, but my words came out sharper than I intended. "I couldn't. I had to get you both in here. Couldn't let it get to you. The bear." I trailed off, the words dying on my tongue as I saw the expression on her face. She was terrified, and who could blame her? I was too. "Is Cody okay?" she asked, her voice trembling as she glanced toward the living room. "He's still alive?" I replied, feeling the lump in my throat tighten. "He's hurt, but he's not dead." I took a few shaky steps toward the couch where Cody was lying, still looking dazed but awake. His golden fur was matted with blood, his sides rising and falling unevenly as he breathed in shallow, ragged gasps. His eyes were dull, his body limp, and for a moment, I thought I saw him wince when I approached. I sank down beside him, my stomach turning as I ran my fingers through his fur, trying to find any signs of severe injury. There were no major wounds, but there was enough blood that I knew he needed a vet soon. "We have to get him to a vet," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can't wait any longer. To Bear." "We can't, Tom," Emily interrupted, her voice strained. "Not with what happened. This dangerous out there." And looked up at her, my heart sinking. I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of the unknown. She was right. It was too dangerous. The bear could be out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. There was no way I was taking Cody anywhere with that kind of threat hanging over us. "I know," I muttered, rubbing my face with my uninjured hand. "But I can't just leave him like this." I stood up, pacing back and forth in the small living room, my thoughts spinning faster than I could process. I felt like I was suffocating in this house, the walls closing in on me, the weight of everything. The attack, the danger, the helplessness was overwhelming. I needed to do something, anything, but I felt powerless. "I've got to call someone," I said suddenly, the idea striking me like a lightning bolt. I grabbed my phone from the table, hoping against hope that this time, I'd get through to someone who could help. But as I scrolled through my contacts, I realized something. There was no one. The sheriff had been clear. "We can't do anything until morning." The rangers wouldn't respond until daylight. It was all so hopeless. I knew I had to do something on my own. For what? My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me. Emily glanced up, her eyes wide. "Who is it?" I checked the screen. _sheriff's office _. "Maybe they finally figured it out," I said, my voice laced with more hope than I felt. "Maybe someone's coming to help." I answered quickly, almost too quickly, my heart racing. "Sheriff's office, this is Deputy Walker." "Deputy," I said, my voice tight. "It's Tom Riley again. The bear is back, just outside the house. It tried to attack me again, and my dog. So, I told you this morning." The deputy cut me off, his tone cold and dismissive. "Bears aren't going to cause trouble unless they feel threatened. We can't respond until the morning. You're just going to have to hunker down and wait. I understand it's scary, but there's nothing we can do right now." "Scary?" I snapped, my anger flaring up like a flame. "You don't understand. It's not just scary. It's life or death. This bear came after me twice and it nearly killed me. You can't just leave us out here to fend for ourselves." The deputy sighed. "Sir, calm down. We're not abandoning you. It's just—" "No," I interrupted, my voice growing louder, more frantic. "No, you're not understanding. I can't stay here. That bear is circling us. It's going to keep coming back until it gets what it wants. We need help now." There was a long pause on the other end, and then, finally, the deputy spoke again, his voice a little less dismissive but still distant. "I'll make a note of it, but there's not much more I can do tonight. You're going to have to secure the house as best you can and wait for the morning. If the bear comes back, we'll send someone out. Until then, I suggest you lock the doors, stay inside, and don't approach the bear." The line went dead before I could say another word. I stared at the phone in my hand, the buzzing of my anger ringing in my ears. He didn't understand. No one did. I was on my own. We were on our own. "You heard that," I said, turning toward Emily, who was standing quietly by the window now, her eyes scanning the dark yard nervously. "I heard," she said, her voice small. "What are we supposed to do?" Just wait? How can we wait? I don't know, I said, my voice hoarse with frustration. But I'm not sitting here and waiting for it to come back. I won't. That bear is out there right now and we don't have anything to protect ourselves. If it comes back, we have nothing. Emily's face tightened with worry, her eyes darting toward the front door. What do you want to do, then? Go after it? We don't even know where it is. We're just stuck here. I stared at her, my heart sinking. She was right. We were stuck. There was nothing we could do. The bear was bigger, faster, stronger, and it knew the woods. We were just trespassers in its territory. But then, as I looked out the window again, I saw something movement, a shadow. My breath hitched. It was back. And this time it wasn't just circling. It was watching, and knew we were here. Emily, lock the door. Now, I said, my voice shaking. It's here. And as the door clicked shut, I realized that our nightmare was far from over. We were just beginning to survive it. The night had stretched on forever, the hours blurring together as the fear gnawed at me. I could hear every creak of the house, every gust of wind that whispered through the trees, and every slight shift in the shadows just beyond the windows. It was as if the world outside had turned into a pressure cooker, slowly closing in on us. I kept pacing back and forth across the living room, my mind a constant storm of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. I had to do something. But what? The deputy had been clear. There was nothing they could do until morning. As if the bear, just a few yards away, was going to be kind enough to wait until sunrise. The reality was sinking in slowly, piece by piece. We were alone out here, isolated. The town was miles away, and the nearest ranger station was even further. We had no backup, no immediate help. The bear had made its point, and now it was playing with us. Tom. Emily's voice broke through my thoughts, her voice tremulous. She was standing at the window, her face pale and drawn, her eyes fixed on the dark yard beyond the glass. It's out there. I can see it. I walked over to join her, my heart pounding. I looked out the window, but it was so dark, so thick with shadow. I couldn't see anything beyond the faint outline of trees at the edge of our property. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Where? Are you sure? She nodded, but her hand was trembling as it rested on the windowsill. I saw it, just a second ago, moving in the trees. It is huge, Tom. I don't know if we can just wait for it to leave. I swallowed hard, the pit in my stomach deepening. The terror of knowing that the bear was out there, watching, waiting, maybe even tracking us, was suffocating. I wanted to say something reassuring, something to make her feel better, but I couldn't. Not when I felt the same helplessness clawing at me. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. A heavy gust hit the side of the house, and I froze, my mind flashing to the worst-case scenario. The bear could tear through the walls if it wanted to, could break in. It was bigger, stronger, faster. It had already proven that. I turned away from the window, pacing again, my hand pressing against the aching wound on my arm. The blood had dried, but the deep cuts were still pulsing with pain, and I couldn't ignore the fact that infection was a real threat. But more than that, the bear was out there and it wasn't afraid. We need to do something, I said, the words coming out in a whisper, as if speaking them aloud might make it all too real. Emily was still watching the window, her eyes darting back and forth, scanning for movement. What do you mean? There's nothing we can do. We can't go outside. We can't just walk out there like nothing's wrong. I stopped pacing and turned to her, my frustration flaring again. We can't sit here and do nothing either. We've got to find a way to protect ourselves, to keep it out. It's coming back. I know it. And if it gets in here, stop. Emily cut in, her voice firm despite the terror that trembled just beneath the surface. Tom, we don't know that for sure. We don't know what it wants. Maybe it's just scared, like us. I shook my head, my chest tight with helplessness. It wasn't scared when it came after me. It wasn't scared when it went after Cody. That bear is hungry, Emily, and it's getting bolder. I could feel the words hanging between us, the truth settling heavily into the room. Neither of us wanted to admit it, but we both knew what was coming. The bear wasn't going to just leave us alone, not when it had found a food source, us, and Cody was still injured. I glanced over at the dog, still lying on the couch, his breathing shallow but steady. He looked so small, so fragile, and it broke something inside me to see him like this. I'm supposed to protect him. But I hadn't been able to stop the bear. We can't just sit here, I said again, more forcefully this time. We need to block the windows, the doors, anything. If that bear comes back, we won't be able to stop it without some kind of plan. Emily's eyes widened at the urgency in my voice, and for a moment, she seemed to hesitate, as if uncertain what to do. But then, as if driven by the same raw instinct that was fueling me, she nodded. "You're right," she said quietly. "Let's figure something out. We can't just wait." We moved quickly, gathering anything we could find to fortify the house. I grabbed the heavy furniture, chairs, tables, and pus, hid them in front of the windows, trying to block any possible points of entry. Emily helped, her hands shaking as she tried to secure the heavy curtains, but it felt like nothing was enough. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, sent a jolt of fear through my body. The minutes dragged on. Every shadow outside felt like a threat. Every rustle in the trees made my blood run cold. Emily and I worked in near silence, save for the occasional whispered word, too scared to speak louder. The silence in the house was stifling. Finally, we finished, or at least as much as we could do. The doors were locked, the windows blocked. There was nothing else to do now but wait. But the waiting was worse than anything. It stretched on, and as the night deepened, so did the weight of our fear. I glanced at the clock. It had only been a couple of hours since the bear had attacked, but it felt like days. Emily sat down on the couch, her eyes glued to the window, her fingers trembling in her lap. She hadn't said much since we started fortifying the house, and I could see the panic building in her breathing quickening, her legs bouncing with restless energy. "I'm scared, Tom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded. So am I. I know, I said softly, sitting next to her. I know, but we have to hold it together. For Cody. For each other. She nodded, but the tears that welled in her eyes were a clear sign of how badly she was breaking. She'd always been strong, practical, but this was different. This wasn't something you could plan for. You couldn't plan for a bear in your backyard, circling like a predator waiting for the kill. Suddenly, there was a noise, a scraping sound, followed by the unmistakable crunch of leaves. My heart stopped. It was outside. I jerked to my feet, my body tensing as the sound grew louder, closer. "Is it here?" Emily's voice was hoarse, panic creeping into her words. "It's outside, isn't it?" I didn't answer. There was no need. I could hear it now, its low growl vibrating through the walls of the house. The bear was back. The growl deepened, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing against the door. The bear was testing it, pushing against the walls we had set up to protect ourselves. My breath hitched in my chest, and for a moment, I just stood there, staring at the door, waiting for the inevitable. It's coming in. I turned to Emily. Her eyes were wide with terror, her body frozen in place. "It's here, Tom," she whispered. "It's here." The door groaned again, louder this time, as though the bear was deliberately trying to break through. And then, as if on cue, it stopped. Silence. We held our breaths, waiting for the next sound. Please don't come in. But the silence stretched on too long, too unnatural. What's happening? I grabbed Emily's hand. "Stay quiet. Don't move." The minutes passed like hours, and then slowly the growling faded. The sound of the bear's claws scratching against the wood of the door grew distant. It was leaving, but for how long? I didn't know. Couldn't know. All I knew was that the night wasn't over, and that bear was still out there hunting. We were still waiting. The silence in the house was suffocating, the kind that presses down on you until you can't breathe, until you feel like the walls are closing in. The bear was gone, at least for now, but it had left its mark on everything. The air was thick with tension, our hearts still pounding from the close call. It had been hours since the last growl had faded into the woods. The house was still, too still. Neither of us spoke, and I could feel Emily's body trembling beside me, though she tried to hide it. We were both awake, lying in the dark, listening to the night that seemed much too quiet. I glanced at the clock. 3:30 a.m. Felt like we'd been here for days, stuck in some kind of waiting game that we couldn't win. "Tom," Emily whispered, her voice shaking. "What if it comes back? What if it finds another way in?" I turned over to face her, trying to summon some calm, something to comfort her. But all I felt was the same gnawing fear that had been with me since the moment the bear first showed itself in our backyard. The fear was alive in me, alive in the house, as though it had rooted itself deep into the bones of the place. "It's not coming back tonight," I said, my voice rough. I wasn't sure if I was trying to reassure her or myself, but I had to believe it. I had to. Emily didn't answer right away. She was staring at the ceiling, her fingers twitching against the sheets. The room was dark, the only light coming from the dim sliver of moonlight that crept through the cracks in the blinds. I could feel her anxiety radiating off her in waves, and I wanted to say something, anything, to make her feel safe again. But I couldn't, not when I was feeling just as helpless. "Do you think it's still out there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. "I don't know. There might be, but we have to assume it's gone for now. It won't be stupid enough to come back tonight." But I wasn't sure I believed that either. Bears don't think like we do. They don't follow rules. They follow instincts. And right now, it wasn't just the bear we were up against. It was our fear, our vulnerability. That's what had kept us on edge. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about our psyche, our ability to hold it together in the face of something we couldn't control. I sat up in bed, running a hand through my hair, trying to shake the exhaustion that had settled in my bones. The adrenaline had worn off, but the crash had left me feeling drained and hollow. I should have been asleep, should have been trying to rest, but I couldn't close my eyes. Not when every noise, every creak of the house, had me jerking awake. Not when the memory of the bear's growl and the weight of its presence was still too fresh in my mind. "Let's try to get some rest," I said, turning back to Emily. "We need to sleep. If it comes back, we'll deal with it. But for now, we can't do anything more." She nodded slowly, but her face was drawn, her eyes wide and still filled with fear. "I know. I just keep thinking about what happened. About Cody." I looked over at our dog. He was lying in the living room, still not fully recovered, but his breathing was steady. I couldn't tell if he was truly resting or just exhausted from the trauma, but I hoped it was the former. I reached over to take Emily's hand, squeezing it. "I know. I keep thinking about it too. But we did what we could. We got him inside. We'll get him to a vet as soon as we can." Emily's eyes closed, and she took a deep breath, but the tension still hadn't left her. I could hear her heartbeat in the quiet, the same frantic pulse that had been hammering in my chest for hours. We lay there in silence for what felt like forever, neither of us able to drift off completely. I could feel the heaviness of the night pulling at me, but every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was the bear's glowing eyes, its massive shape looming over me. It wasn't just a nightmare. It was a reality I was still living in. At some point, exhaustion finally caught up to me, and I drifted into a broken, restless sleep. But sleep was no relief. I dreamt of the bear, its claws, its teeth, its guttural growl. It was chasing me and I was running, but my legs wouldn't move fast enough. Every time I looked back, it was closer. The ground was wet and slippery, and I could hear its breath hot on my heels. I jerked awake with a gasp, my heart racing, my body covered in sweat. The room was still dark, but the nightmare was all too real. I swung my legs off the bed, my feet hitting the cold floor with a thud. "Tom," Emily's voice was groggy, concerned. "Are you okay?" I rubbed my face with both hands, trying to shake off the fear that gripped me. I'd been asleep for less than an hour, but it had felt like an eternity. My mind was still in that place, still trapped in the terror of the attack. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice tight. Just a bad dream." Emily didn't say anything at first, but I could hear her moving beside me, her hand brushing against my arm in the dark. "You're shaking. Aren't you sure you're okay?" I didn't know how to answer that. Was I okay? I wasn't sure anymore. The attack had left something broken inside me. I couldn't pretend I was fine, but I didn't want to drag her deeper into it either. "I'm fine," I repeated, more firmly this time. "We both need sleep. We'll be okay." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. We weren't okay. We couldn't be okay until that bear was gone. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that might not happen anytime soon. "I just want this to end," Emily said, her voice small and vulnerable. "I want to go back to normal." I didn't know how to respond. Normal felt like a distant memory. We sat in silence for a while, the darkness of the house wrapping around us like a blanket. The air felt heavy, and even the softest sound seemed too loud. Every minute stretched on, dragging me deeper into a kind of waking nightmare. Suddenly there was a sound, _thump _. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. It came again, a soft thud that made the walls shudder. "Tom!" Emily's voice quivered. "What was that?" I stood up abruptly, my breath shallow. "I don't know. Stay here." I moved toward the door, my bare feet making no sound on the cold wooden floor. My hand was already on the doorknob when I heard it again. Closer now, the unmistakable scrape of claws against wood. The bear was here. I turned back toward Emily, panic rising in my chest. "It's outside. Stay in the room." I couldn't believe this was happening. The bear had found us again. It wasn't going to leave until it got what it wanted. I crept toward the window, my heart hammering in my chest. Through the slats of the blinds, I saw a shape in the yard. It was huge, moving with purpose. The bear was back, and this time it wasn't just a shadow, it was real. I turned back to Emily, my voice low, tense. "We need to get out. Now." The door was locked. The windows were barricaded. The furniture we had piled up felt like a flimsy defense against the monstrous creature outside. But it was all we had left. I didn't know how long we could hold out, but I knew we couldn't let it in. It felt like the air had become heavier, sicker, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Every sound from outside sent a jolt of terror through me. The soft scrape of claws against the wood sending waves of nausea through my stomach. Emily was shaking beside me, her eyes wide, her face pale in the dim light of the living room. Cody lay still on the couch, his breathing shallow, but at least the worst of his wounds had stopped bleeding. I stood by the window watching the dark yard outside. The bear was out there, I could feel it. Its presence was a weight, an oppressive thing that didn't belong to us. I could hear its low growls, distant but clear, like a warning. Emily's voice broke through the silence, a shaky whisper. "Tom, what if it comes in? What do we do?" I didn't have an answer. The panic in her voice mirrored the fear in my chest. "We'll fight it off if we have to. We'll do whatever it takes." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. A bear was not something you could fight off with bare hands or a kitchen knife. I had been lucky once, but luck doesn't always hold. I knew that, but what else could we do? We couldn't just let it tear its way inside. The minutes dragged on. The hours stretched out into eternity. Every creak of the house, every rustle in the trees, had me on edge. I tried to focus, to think clearly, but the adrenaline was still coursing through me, and my mind was a blur. I had to do something. Anything. Finally, around 5 a.m., the noises outside stopped. The bear had gone silent, but I didn't trust it. I didn't trust anything anymore. I think it's gone, Emily said, her voice tentative but hopeful. I don't know, I replied, my eyes still fixed on the yard. The light outside was beginning to shift, the faintest hint of dawn breaking through the trees. But it wasn't enough. It could still be out there. It might be waiting for us to lower our guard. She exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against her eyes. I don't know how much longer I can take this. The fear, the waiting, is eating me alive. I turned to her then, seeing her for the first time in hours, her exhaustion and fear written clearly on her face. Her shoulders were slumped, her body thin with tension. The whole night had worn us both down. I wanted to say something to comfort her, but I didn't know how. The truth was, we were both broken by this, by the bear, by the waiting, by the knowledge that nothing was certain anymore. Emily, we'll get through this, I said, my voice rough. I hated that I sounded like I was trying to convince myself as much as I was trying to convince her. She looked up at me, her lips trembling as she nodded. I just don't want to lose you. I felt a pang in my chest at her words. Lose me? That thought hadn't even occurred to me. But now that she said it, I realized the truth. She had no idea how close I had come to losing myself last night. No idea how close I had come to being taken down by that bear. We'll be okay, I said again, more forcefully this time, though the words felt hollow in the silence that followed. We sat together in the stillness for a while, the weight of the night pressing in on us. There was nothing left to say. We were just waiting now, waiting for the bear to return, waiting for morning, waiting for something, anything that would break the tension. The sun started to rise, weak and pale, filtering through the blinds in hazy rays. I watched the light move across the floor, and I thought for a moment that maybe this was it. Maybe we'd made it through the worst of it. But I couldn't let myself believe that. Couldn't. Not after everything that had happened. A loud knock at the door broke the stillness, and both of us jerked in shock. My pulse shot through my neck like a lightning bolt. Tom, Emily said, her voice urgent. Who is it? Who can be here? I didn't answer immediately. The sheriff had promised to send someone out, but it was too soon. Couldn't be the sheriff. I stood, moving quickly toward the door, every muscle in my body tense. I moved slowly, cautiously, as if I were sneaking past a predator, my hands trembling as I reached for the doorknob. Tom, a familiar voice called out from the other side, and my heart skipped in my chest. Great. I opened the door slightly, just enough to see him standing on the porch. Greg Harrison, a neighbor who lived a few miles down the road, stood there in a heavy jacket, his face creased with concern. He held a rifle in one hand, and his dog, a black lab named Max, was standing by his side. Are you okay? He asked, looking me over with a critical eye. I heard what happened. Is everything all right? I blinked, momentarily taken aback. Greg, what are you doing here? He nodded toward the house. I heard the sheriff was sending someone out this morning, but I figured it was better if I came over myself. My wife was worried after hearing the news, and, well, I don't think anyone around here is going to feel safe until we know for sure what's going on. He stepped forward, glancing around the yard. You've had a bear around here, haven't you? I nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, it's been circling the house all night. I think it's still out there somewhere. Greg's face darkened. You sure it's not just passing through? Could be looking for food. I didn't know how to answer that. I had no idea why the bear was here, why it had attacked us, or why it hadn't left. I just knew it wasn't gone. Not yet. Where's the sheriff? Asked. They said they'd send someone out. Didn't they call you? Greg looked uncomfortable, shifting his feet. They're on their way, but they're spread pretty thin right now with all the bear sightings around. I'll tell you, Tom. This is more than just a curious bear. Something's wrong. This one's been aggressive. They think it's desperate or wounded. Could be more dangerous than we thought. I could feel the weight of his words sinking into my chest. Underscore more dangerous. Underscore the last thing I wanted to hear right now. I need to check on the dog, I said, my mind racing, and make sure everything's locked up again before we. I'll take care of it, Greg said, stepping forward before I could finish. I've got my rifle and I've been hunting bears for years. I know what I'm doing. You just stay inside and make sure no one else gets hurt. I didn't argue. Couldn't. I was too tired, too drained to argue about what needed to be done. Greg turned to me, giving me one last look. We'll take care of it. You stay safe. As he walked back toward the yard with Max trailing behind him, I couldn't help but wonder if we were really safe anymore. The bear was still out there, and as much as I wanted to believe it was gone, the truth was clear now. We had survived the night, but the danger wasn't over. It had only just begun.